I wanted to now discuss black hole physics from a different perspective that I've just gleaned from a video of Leonard Susskind and a few other scientists talking about this so-called second law of quantum complexity, and this idea that after black holes reach thermal equilibrium, which they do very quickly, that they increase in complexity in a computational sense associated with block ciphers and these sorts of things, and these accurately describe black holes in their increasing complexity over time. And it's not something I'm going to claim, I think, to fully understand quite, but I I don't see really why that's divorced from an idea of entropy. I really don't understand it because they use the analogy of if you mix a cup of black coffee with some milk, it reaches equilibrium in terms of how much it's mixed very quickly. But the analogy would be extended to quantum complexity in terms of if you were to leave the cup of coffee, it would eventually reach room temperature, cool down. After that, it would evaporate. But those are still entropic processes occurring after you've you've left the cup of coffee for a while. So the driver of this increase in quantum complexity, it seems to me, is still an entropic process. It's still a measure of the increased disorder of a system. So I'm not 100% certain, really, that this can be divorced from entropy, and I'm not so certain that entropy ends when something's in like a mixed state equilibrium or when it reaches thermal equilibrium with the room temperature around it. Since, I mean, if you leave anything for long enough, right, something else is going to happen to it. And I'm going to connect this in a minute with thinking about Schrodinger's cat, this cat in a box situation, this example of this unfortunate cat, and how this is as well an entropic system underpinned by thermodynamic processes. So when it comes to thermodynamics of black holes, using this coffee cup analogy, if the black hole is the cup of coffee, it will reach thermal equilibrium reasonably quickly. Then it will begin evaporating away, because a cup of coffee is of course still mostly water. It'll evaporate away, or the water will evaporate away eventually if you just leave the cup of coffee, and then you'll be left with sort of something in the bottom, some kind of stain of coffee, I imagine, surrounding the glass that the coffee was in, or the cup that the coffee was in, and you'll have some kind of residue there from the black hole slash coffee. The black hole, yeah, like radiates away over a very, very long period of time, though it remains in thermal equilibrium for a lot of that time, I think, because it's accreting new material constantly. Then there's the Hawking radiation going out of the black hole, but the Hawking radiation takes quadrillions, septillions, or hexabillion years, or 10 to the 43 years, or whatever it is, to evaporate away. So it's a very, very slow process of evaporation with black holes. And when we're talking about the universe reaching heat death and the cosmological implications of things such as entropy and this increasing quantum complexity, which I don't think are possible to divorce from one another. I think Leonard Susskind was actually wrong to suggest that in this video that I watched, put out by Quantum magazine, when he was talking about computational complexity and black holes. I really don't see the two as being separable from one another from any understanding of the second law of thermodynamics. And I think a second law of quantum complexity is like, well, I don't know what the first law of quantum complexity is necessarily. Well, I don't know much about complexity studies in physics particularly, other than the work of one physicist who I've read on Starling flocks, and that has crossovers with all sorts of computational theories as well. And yeah, I consider this still a thermodynamic process, still driven by entropy ultimately, and still driven by this tendency of order within systems to disorder rather in systems to increase over time. And yeah, I think that's really the mark of it. And when it comes to this cat in the box, what's really going on there with that is that until you make a measurement of the system, you can consider the cat both alive and dead. However, given the fact that this radioactive isotope that's releasing an alpha particle to release the vial of poison, given that that does have a half-life, the amount of time, the time frame of that half-life determines the life of the cat, basically. So within that time period, or within, a certain, within that time period roughly, we have to consider the cat both alive and dead. However, after a certain amount of time has elapsed, like the half-life of the radioactive element, we can be pretty certain that the cat will be dead at some point, right? And when the cat's dead, it'll rot within the box, and then whether or not we open the box, of course, we'll get evidence or receive information in terms of the smell of the rotting cat's corpse, that the cat is indeed dead, or we'll hear mewing from the cat inside the box as it succumbs to death by poisoning. And then eventually, it'll rot, driven again by thermodynamic processes, or driven by more like biological processes of microorganisms and so on, consuming the dead cat. And then, its bones will be left eventually. Those will eventually turn to dust, and so on and so forth, driven again by thermal processes, ultimately, driven by, energy systems exchanging information with one another, or energy with one another, even if that is down to the level of microorganisms. And this sort of thing we can consider it in terms of a microeconomy of microorganisms munching on the dead cat's body, and so on, and whatever's left of the cat, even if it's a hermetically sealed container, will eventually evaporate away over a very, very, very long period of time due to Hawking radiation. So when it comes to the information escape paradox of black holes, you can consider reaching the state of thermal equilibrium within this sort of within this pedagogical reference frame, if you like, something akin to the cat dying. That's thermal equilibrium. However, this quantum complexity stuff that Susskind is talking about, these other scientists are talking about, those are the entropic processes that follow thermal equilibrium. And this is what Hawking was talking about in terms of his information escape paradox, that eventually black holes do evaporate away, of course. And this is driven still by entropy, still by the second law of thermodynamics. And that occurs over a very, very, very long period of time. That's more analogous to the, as I said, the cat dying, or the cup of coffee reaching room temperature, or the mixed state of the coffee and the milk, or whatever you want, or whatever gauge you want to put on the system, whatever sort of concepts in measurement you want to invoke upon the system that you're looking for in particular. So we do still have this anthropic principle operating within quantum systems such as this, where we go out looking for certain dimensions that we're measuring, such as mixedness of coffee, however we're determining to gauge that, or thermal equilibrium with the temperature around it, or state of evaporatedness, or whatever it happens to be. But taking a more holistic approach, we find, I think, that a range of different processes are going on, such as in the dead cat inside Schrodinger's box, of course, or in the Schrodinger's cat thought experiment. We find that, yes, we in quantum theory must consider the cat both alive and dead until we make a measurement of it. However, after a certain amount of time has elapsed, we can assume that it is dead, and then we'll come to the understanding that there's all sorts of microorganisms and entropic, ultimately, processes of heat exchange and energy exchange going on in what we might even call an economy of microorganisms munching on a dead cat. And whatever gauges we determine to put on the system, we can understand it ultimately, yes, by thermodynamics, and ultimately in terms of, yes, quantum complexity as well, most certainly. And Suskind's not wrong, really, to have said what he said. He's not even wrong. Well, he's not wrong. It's another perfectly legitimate way of looking at black hole entropy and black hole thermodynamics, in my opinion. And it's just, it is dependent upon our anthropic perspective, our perspective as measurers, as researchers, as scientists looking at a given system and gauging its entropic qualities, and what we go looking for and what we don't go looking for, and the systems of measurement that we apply to things, and the particular quantities that we want to gauge within a system. And these come down into, I think, the observer effect, isn't it? And the anthropic principle is deeply involved in these sorts of considerations, and these are very much like philosophical considerations more than they are, strictly speaking, as such scientific. Well, science is part of philosophy, of course, but they're less to do with what we're measuring. It is to do with what we're measuring, of course, but it's less to do with how we're measuring something. It's more to do with what we're measuring and why we're measuring it, I think. And that's sort of the best way of syncretizing, I think, this second law of quantum complexity with the second law of thermodynamics, and being able to bottle that area of understanding, that emerging area of understanding within the study of quantum gravity and black hole thermodynamics and quantum thermodynamics and all these sorts of things, how to engage with that area of understanding through this computational reference frame with a classical physics understanding of entropy. So I think that's the best way of looking at black hole entropy, black hole thermodynamics, and the information escape paradox, and Hawking radiation, and all these sorts of subjects from within this Susskindian reference frame. And I do love Leonard Susskind. I think he's a brilliant, brilliant scientist. One of my favourites, actually. Had a great book series, The Theoretical Minimum, which I absorbed quite early on. And yeah, owe him a great debt. And with George Hrabowski, who's his co-author. But yeah, this has been my video on black hole entropy, the second law of quantum complexity, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for watching. Bye.